Welcome viewers, welcome to the third lecture on prokaryotic gene regulation. We initiate our lecture by discussing about accessory proteins and nucleotide binding proteins. In bacteria such as E. coli, there are several rather non-specific DNA binding proteins that are sometimes referred to as accessory factors or histone-like proteins. They function partly by affecting the chromosome structure and partly they regulate gene expression. Some tend to have a negative effect on gene regulation like HNS protein or STPA protein. On others do have a positive effect on gene expression like heat unstable protein, HU proteins or integration host factors or IHF proteins.
Ma'am, you have told that DNA binding proteins are non-specific.
Yeah.
Then how they can positively or negatively regulate the gene expression?
Yeah, I said that their binding sites are not that specific, means they can bind in versatile places within the chromosome. So let's start discussing about the function of HNS proteins or STPA proteins. So what HNS protein actually does, it consists of two domains. One of them is DNA binding domain and other is a protein-protein interaction domain. First of all, HNS binds to a DNA and then HNS proteins bind to each other utilizing their protein-protein interaction domains, and as a result of which there is formation of aggregates of more than one HNS units together onto the DNA, which gives compactness of the DNA and leads to condensation of the DNA. Or in other words, we may say that HNS are behaving like histone proteins of eukaryotes. So if they are bringing compactness into the DNA, it means we all know that whenever we want to go for gene expression or replication, we need unwinding of the DNA. It means HNS is working against it. It is carrying on compactness or condensation of the DNA. So indirectly, it is restricting or negatively regulating gene expression. On the other hand, we have seen that HNS has got higher affinity towards various regulatory proteins of wide ranges, and these regulatory proteins are scattered throughout the chromosome in versatile places wherein they are being regulated by HNS proteins. So in contrast to the genuine global regulators, HNS does control specific responses, nor does it respond to any particular signal. Therefore, the effect that is being executed by HNS is called as silencing, as it is not working in a specific way. Now let us talk about the role played by HU proteins or integration host factors. As we have discussed the role of various activators like NTRC or MERT. In case of NTRC, we have said that this activator binds to the DNA at a far away distance from the promoter region. So if any regulator or activator is binding a DNA at a far away distance from the promoter and it wishes to execute its positive response onto the gene expression, then it has to make contacts with the RNA polymerase which is bound onto the promoter region. So that can only be done by bending of the DNA. As we have seen in case of araoperon, the bending of the DNA is going on. But there, the bending of DNA was being driven by the dimerization between the Ara-C proteins or activator proteins binding onto the operator regions. But that may not be the case everywhere. So under such circumstances, we really need help of certain other factors which promote the bending of the DNA. Here comes the role of HU proteins or integration host factors. What they do, they facilitate the bending of the DNA, thereby they are making it possible that the activator protein, which is binding at a far away distance from the region of promoter wherein RNA polymerase is binding, so it wants to execute its action on it. So this can be only done by bending, and there should be someone to facilitate bending, and this facilitating factor is the HU protein. So this is how we can understand that integration host factors. Though it acts in a non-specific manner, but it can execute positive effect on gene regulation. They sometimes help in integration process, inversion process, and recombination events. All these events they perform by bending of the DNA in an appropriate conformation. They all affect the expression of certain genes that need the DNA in their upstream region to be bent in order to be transcribed. Actually, the study of prokaryotic gene regulation will be incomplete if we fail to mention the role of RNAs in regulating gene expression. Though the story is not very old, it emerged in 1990. The concept of microRNAs and RNA interference emerged the doors of eukaryotic gene regulation. But nowadays, we are well acquainted with a huge number of small RNA molecules which are playing a vital role in prokaryotic gene expression as well as in DNA replication processes. To start up the gene regulation exhibited by small RNA molecules, we will first take up the case of 6S RNA. 6S RNA of E. coli binds to the sigma 70 subunit of RNA polymerase and it downregulates the gene expression from any sigma 70 promoters. We have seen that in the stationary phase, there is accumulation of huge amount of 6S RNA. And what it does in the stationary phase, actually the cell wants to synthesize a new sigma factor, sigma E is synthesized, and it wants to use this new sigma factor for synthesis of certain genes which help them to establish themselves in the stationary phase. So, under these circumstances, the 6S RNA, which is downregulating any gene expression from sigma 70 subunit, it means in a way it is promoting gene expression from sigma E subunit as it doesn't bind sigma E. So this is one case wherein we see that the cell is getting benefit out of using this 6S RNA and it helps it to survive under stationary phase conditions. The second example that comes in our mind is a small RNA which is almost 80 to 110 nucleotide long. They are generally formed by processing of large double-stranded RNA precursors. Instead, they are encoded in their final form by small genes. It is not so that they are synthesized from large sizes of RNA, they are the broken products, but they are originally synthesized from small genes. The small genes actually encode this small RNA molecules. In E. coli, there are 100 such small RNA molecules, out of which we know the function of almost dozen of them. So most of them work by base pairing with the complementary sequences within the target mRNA. And by forming these complementary base pairings, sometimes they inhibit translation and in some cases they stimulate translation as well.
Ma'am, the interaction between small RNAs and mRNAs is strong enough to create base pairing between them?
Not always so. Therein we have seen involvement of some other factors called HFQs. What are HFQs? HFQ is basically an RNA chaperone which is needed to strengthen the weak interaction between the small RNA and the target mRNA. So it also facilitates the base pairing also by binding the small RNAs and even before they are paired with their targets. So HFQ is actually helping the entire process of binding between small RNAs and their target mRNAs. Riboswitches or sensory RNAs are a specialized form of transcription attenuation that does not involve ribosome behavior. As we have discussed during tryptophan operon, that attenuation is exhibited because of stalling of ribosome onto the leader peptide region. But herein we were first visualizing that mRNA itself can regulate expression of the gene on its downstream just by altering its secondary structure. And this alteration of the secondary structure of mRNA is executed by certain molecules or inducer molecules binding onto the mRNA. In the case of leader region, which is called as the 5' untranslated region of the mRNA, it folds in two different ways. If folded in one way, we will see that transcription is continuing, and if it is folded in some other way, then it restricts the transcription step. What is so unique and exciting about these riboswitches is that they alter their folding pattern in direct response to the binding of an effector molecule. This capability was previously thought to be associated only with proteins. Earlier we used to think that it is the interaction of a protein with any signaling molecule that alters the conformation of protein, thereby the protein makes certain modifications and carries on the expression of a gene or restricts the expression of a gene. This is for the first time wherein we can see that it is the secondary structure of mRNA that is regulating the transcription. This thing can be well understood by taking the example of one of such operons that will take up the case of Bacillus subtilis. Before going to it, I would like to share that the riboswitch is made up of two important components. Number one is an aptamer and second is the expression platform. It is the aptamer region wherein the signaling molecule will bind and it will alter the conformation of this aptamer. Finally, it makes alterations in the expression platform. So the number one step is the aptamer binds the small ligand and it undergoes a conformational change, causing a change in the secondary structure of the adjoining expression platform. These conformational changes actually alter the expression of the associated gene by either terminating transcription or inhibiting the initiation of translation. So let's start up the example of RIB operon or riboflavin biosynthetic operon in Bacillus subtilis. Riboflavin biosynthesis enzymes is repressed by flavin mononucleotide, which is derived from riboflavin itself. When the transcription of the RIB operon begins, sequences in the leader region of the mRNA fold into a structure which we called as RFN element. What happens next that this element when binds to FMN, or in other words when FMN binds to this RFN element, it alters the folding of the leader region, and because of this alteration in the folding pattern, it creates a termination of transcription, or a prokaryotic transcription termination signal is generated. As you can see that this aptamer, which is called RFN box, therein the FMN comes, it binds there and changes the conformation of the expression platform, thereby a row independent transcription termination signal is generated in a premature fashion, leading to stop of expression of genes which synthesize riboflavin.
Ma'am, do riboswitches only regulate prokaryotic transcription?
No, we have seen the involvement of riboswitches in regulating translation as well. So they also regulate translation. They contain effector binding sites at the 5' end of the mRNA. Binding of the effector molecule alters the folding pattern of the leader region of the mRNA. What happens next, that if the folding pattern gets altered, this leads to occlusion of the Shine-Dalgarno sequences or the ribosome binding sites. So this inhibits the binding of ribosomes onto the SD sites because the SD sites are hidden because of this change in conformations. So the leader region of thiamine operons, we see structures called TH1 element. This TH1 element actually is responsible for binding of thymine pyrophosphate. So once thymine pyrophosphate binds to this TH1 element, this leads a conformational change in the leader region And because of this conformational change, what you can see that the SD sequence gets sequestered and it becomes impossible for the ribosome to get access to the SD sequence as it becomes a part of a stem loop structure. So therein what we can see here that just the structural changes in the TH1 box is restricting the translation of the mRNA. Actually, the story of prokaryotic gene regulation remains incomplete if we fail to turn the pages of bacteriophage lambda gene regulation. Bacteriophage lambda is a temperate phage that infects E. coli. It can take over two pathways of life. One is the lytic mode and another is the lysogenic mode. Under the lytic mode, it has to synthesize many genes which are involved in its establishment in the cell and for its replication, for its transcription and translation of genes, and finally to synthesize the packaging proteins and the lysis enzymes to come out of the cell. But the other pathway is the lysogenic mode, wherein it integrates its genome inside the bacterial chromosome. Now it is to be decided by the phage that which mode it is going to opt. That decision is a crucial decision and it is the summation of many regulations which are occurring simultaneously inside the bacterial cell, taking help of the bacteriophage genome. To start up the story, let's have a look on the important regulatory genes of lambda. The two most important regulatory genes of lambda are the C1 gene that codes for the repressor and the CRO gene, which is the second important regulatory gene. Apart from these two regulatory genes, we do have certain important regulatory promoter sequences, namely PL for P left promoter, PR for P right promoter, and PRM, which stands for promoter for repressor maintenance. To start up the story, we will see that if the phage undergoes the lytic mode, then the promoters which are switched on are PL and PR. Under such circumstances, the PRM, that is promoter for repressor maintenance, remains switched off. On the other hand, if the bacteriophage undergoes a lysogenic mode, then it is only the repressor maintenance promoter that is active and rest of the promoters, that is PR and PL, remains silent. Now let's have a look on the structure of the repressor protein, which is coded by the gene called C1. It comprises of two domains. One is called as the activating domain, or it has got a DNA binding domain, and second, it has got a carboxy terminal domain, which is involved in dimerization. This N-terminal domain is involved in binding to the DNA, whereas the carboxy terminal domain is involved in interacting with another monomer of the repressor. It can bind to different operator regions with different affinities. So let's have a look on the operator regions wherein it can bind. They are, say for example, OR1, OR2 and OR3. All these three operator regions are suitable for the binding by the repressor. But they are different because they have got different binding affinities. Say for example, the repressor protein has got maximum binding affinity towards OR1, and once it binds as a dimer, and this dimer then cooperatively helps the binding of another dimer of repressor binding onto OR2. Once the dimer binds onto OR1 and OR2, then it restricts the transcription from PR promoter. Means rightward promoter is inactivated by binding of repressor, and the immediate gene that is transcribed from the rightward promoter is called CRO. And on the other way, this repressor protein, when it is bound onto the OR2 region, it positively regulates the synthesis of its own gene, that is C1, from another promoter called PRM, as I discussed just now, for repressor maintenance, because PRM has an overlap with the OR2 sequence. So we can see here that lambda repressor, in one way it is acting as a repressor for the synthesis of CRO gene. On the other hand, it is acting as an activator for its own synthesis from PRM promoter. As we can see here, that CRO protein, it has got only one domain, but it binds as a dimer. But binding of CRO restricts the synthesis of repressor. Why? Because its binding affinity is more towards the OR3 site, and once this OR3 site is being blocked, then synthesis from PRM is restricted. So CRO protein, first it restricts the synthesis of repressor, and when its own synthesis is reaching a threshold level, because CRO protein has got least affinity towards OR1 or OR2 sites. So it will be first binding onto OR3 region, restricting the synthesis of repressor, but it has got no role to play in regulating other things. But when its concentration increases so much, then it will negatively regulate its own synthesis by blocking the OR1 site as well, or OR2 sites. So herein we can say that CRO, though its name is not a repressor, but it is really acting as an universal repressor, initially repressing the synthesis of C1 that codes for a repressor, and finally when there is overaccumulation of C1 protein or CRO protein itself, then it represses its own synthesis.
Ma'am, how lambda phage undergoes induction from lysogenic to lytic mode of life cycle?
Yeah, this is supposed to be the most important decision which is to be made by a lambda lysogen. Whenever a lambda lysogen undergoes a DNA damage, or there is some sort of damage in the DNA, then certain special class of genes are being activated called REC-A proteins within the cell. These are host-coded proteins which are involved in recombination process, and they play a vital role in repairing the DNA damage. What they do, they have got binding affinity towards a repressor protein called LEX-A. The LEX-A is a repressor that represses the synthesis of all those enzymes which are involved in DNA damage repair. So normally, under normal conditions, these genes are switched off. But when there is a DNA damage, REC-A gets activated and it cleaves LEX-A and removes it from the DNA. Similar to LEX-A, we have the structure of the LAC repressor or lambda repressor. This lambda repressor is similar to LEX-A, and its carboxy terminal domain, which is involved in providing cooperativity and which is involved in dimerization, is being chopped up by the REC-A protein. Once this gets chopped up, it means the bound lambda repressor onto the operator sites OR1 and OR2 is losing its affinity towards this operator sites. As I said, that this binding is very much dependent on cooperative binding. So once this lambda repressor is removed from the operator sites O1, OR1 and OR2, then the P-right promoter is being occupied by RNA polymerase, and the first gene which is transcribed from PR promoter is CRO protein. Once it gets synthesized, it takes over the command and it binds to the OR3 site, which is the another site where from the transcription of the repressor protein is to be started. So CRO gets synthesized and it makes sure that there is no further synthesis of repressor protein. So this is how the lambda phage undergoes conversion from the lysogenic mode to the lytic mode.
When a lambda phage first infects a bacterial cell, then what are the factors that help lambda phage to take decision between the lysogenic mode and the lytic mode?
This decision is primarily taken by the two important early regulatory genes called C2 and C3. C2 is just lying on the right word, it is synthesized from PR, and C3 is synthesized from PL. C2 is acting as a transcriptional activator to activate the synthesis of repressor from a weak promoter called repressor establishment promoter. So if C2 gets synthesized, then it activates the synthesis of repressor, and repressor once gets synthesized takes the command and restricts the synthesis of CRO and switches on the lysogenic mode. But the question is, what are the regulators of C2? It is said that if the infection is done at a high multiplicity of infection, then it prefers to go for a lysogenic mode if the MOI is more than 1. The reason behind is, out of so many phages which are getting inside one bacterial cell, there are chances that there is huge amount of synthesis of C2 at least, which will promote the synthesis of C1 from repressor establishment promoter, and thereby it leads the cell towards lysogeny. On the other hand, if the MOI is less than 1, then there are chances of phage undergoing the lytic mode. Now, the factors which regulate the stability of C2 proteins. There are certain proteases which are present within the cell that chop up C2, called HFQs. If the status of the cell, that the cells are very healthy, then the amount of proteases are high, and if the protease amount is high, then C2 protein gets chopped up, and if C2 gets chopped up, there is no synthesis of C1, and hence there is no repression, then lytic mode. On the other hand, if the status of the cell is very bad, it is poor, then the amount of proteases are less, then C2 protein is stable enough, it promotes C1 synthesis and lysogeny is promoted.